as a positive event and continue doing it. We do welcome, and we have already been in, say, loose cooperation with the Atlantic Centre, and we hope to reinforce this because we have here a very good facilitating organism, and I think we all have to put our shoulders behind it to go forward. And also we welcome all the countries and international institutions to contact us, or we will definitely also contact them. We already started to roll out our port governance program, because we want to have this as a really prominent function, neutral body, and everybody raising the bar. Now, okay, maybe this is theory, and you could say, how can you go practically in this? So we'll have, and maybe I'm jumping in your questions, and I leave the floor to you a second.
We can stop your thinking process at the moment, and then we jump for the next session of questions, and I will now move to Stephanie. And the Gulf of Guinea Maritime Institute has been involved in many aspects of the blue and maritime economy, development, so to say. But tell us a little bit about the inseparable relation, I should say as well, between security and development. And in this way of thought, this line of thought, in that maritime region, which is the Gulf of Guinea, and the security studies you are developing, tell us a little bit. Those studies will cope with the present and emerging threats, I presume. What are the capabilities you consider as relevant, ranging from, let's say, social aspects like a gender perspective, or for example, technology or the cyberspace, and what are some of the conclusions you reach to be implemented to prevent or respond to those threats? Stephanie, please.
Thank you for that question. I think it's, yeah, okay. Thank you for that question. I'm glad that in this question that you asked, I had three things that are definitely interlinked and dependent on each other. And that's security, development, and then the gendered implications of all of these. Because we can't have this conversation devoid of that. I think I want to center on the gendered aspects, not just because I'm the only female on this panel, but because these are conversations that we should be having, right? The issue of women's participation in the maritime industry has been a long-standing one, and we certainly have looked at it from several different perspectives. I mean, it's been decades since 1935 when the world had its first female captain, and so we've made a lot of progress since then. But going forward, I think what remains is to figure out how we can reframe our thinking about the role of women, in fact, the role of both genders when it comes to advancing the cause of, ocean governance and maritime security, especially, for instance, within the context of the Gulf of Guinea. And I just want to bring up the fact that there are the roles that we think of, the reasons that we think of as important to integrating women in the maritime industry. So, for instance, we talk about the issue of gender equality, the fact that women have to be free to choose whichever career paths they want. But what I want to propose today is that we look at this from a different perspective, and that is the perspective of the benefits to the maritime industry that accrue from, having a gender-balanced sector, right? And I just want to run quickly through a few of these. So, for instance, we can talk about the fact that women bring some level of improved safety and security and quality assurance to the maritime industry. And why do I say this? Well, it's because we've found in our research that gender diversity in the maritime industry can bring on a whole set of unique skills and perspectives to the job. So you take women, for instance, and you take our attention to detail. And then you can think of how traits like these can be relevant when we operate within the maritime sector, where attention to detail is something that is extremely important. And then you can also think of the fact that women add diverse skills and perspectives to the workforce. So it's much like what we stand to gain from the engagement of youth in dialogues such as these, right? We don't want to leave youth out. We certainly don't want to leave women out, because we all bring unique perspectives to the table that may be relevant in tackling some of these security concerns that arise. And for countries, across Africa, especially the developing countries in the Gulf of Guinea region, it's important to look at the participation of women in a broad sense. It's not just about having female seafarers. It's also about having women who are actively engaged in ocean governance and maritime security policy. It's about having women representatives in parliament so that decisions can be taken that favor marine environmental outcomes that are positive for the entire region. And then, of course, I want to, if I have the time, do I? Okay. I want to also take a moment to hone this back to the issue of technology and how it can help us achieve this, because over the past week, that has been the focus of our discussions during the maritime security course. And so if we do have on the one side the fact that it's important to have a very balanced maritime industry. And then on the other side, we have the fact that technology could be a tool to achieving this outcome. But how? We need to look into how we can harness the technological advancements that we are experiencing now to be able to help in creating this balance that we anticipate having in the maritime industry. And one significant impact technology has had, which I'm sure you'll all agree with, is the fact that it has led to the automation of several maritime operations. So at the very least, that has reduced the high burden of physical demands across several maritime roles. Of course, this benefits both men and women. It's an easier task to do going forward if you have technological tools that allow you to, for instance, stack containers aboard vessels and so on and so forth. But perhaps one of the most significant contributions of technology in this regard is the fact that, let me put it this way, sea blindness has been more pervasive than we think. It's not just about the fact that we are not aware of the threats and insecurities out in the ocean. It's also about the fact that we are not aware of the state of seafarers at sea, the well-being of all persons on board vessels. And these include vulnerable groups such as women. And so technology creates this unique opportunity to be able to get a better sense of what is going on with life out at sea. And in order to move to this state, definitely we have to think of moving from just maritime domain awareness in terms of being aware of the threats of, say, piracy and armed robbery at sea, to a more extensive form of maritime domain awareness, to beginning to look into the welfare of each and every seafarer who's on board the vessel. And this is where women stand to benefit. If there are tools and technologies that allow us to be able to monitor what is going on board vessels, to monitor and detect potential risk factors or abuses, let me round it up, then we are making great progress. Hopefully more of these issues will come up in the course of the discussion. Thank you.
I'm sure I will challenge you on the next question about action, so to say, and now you will combine or integrate those dimensions of a capability or the capacity building you are creating. Well, moving now to the policy Center for the New South, and I'm grateful to be with you. I have a long relation from the past policy center from OCP for about 10 years, and I'm very happy to see how the policy center evolved and how the vision has been embraced in such a vibrant combination for this idea of the New South. Well, I also know that your center has developed studies addressing mostly the crisis management situations with a focus on the Sahara region, the northern part of the continent, and impacting sometimes on the coastal countries. Can you give us your perspectives about what has been done, what has unfortunately failed so often, and what are the lessons that we can learn to address future situations? And in terms of quality components, the framework of the intervention, sometimes we push too much on sovereignty, and maybe we have other options also to embrace. In those littoral regions that we are focusing, and if possible also in what will impact the port security that we are discussing here. Okay, please.
Thank you, and thank you to the Atlantic Center for having us. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to bring the inland perspective to maritime security. And we either like it or not, the impacts of what's happening on inland does have an impact on maritime security, on the ports, on the cities where the ports are located. So that's a context that we need to understand very well in order to tackle maritime security issues. Myself, I spent the 13 years working with different actors, including Special Operations Command, AFRICOM, working with UCID, working with the German government, with the Netherlands government, supporting multiple activities in the region. So I have pretty good idea of things that's been done, things that has worked, not worked in the Sahel region, as well as in West Africa in general, especially coastal states. What's been done, and if we look at the situation right now, it's very difficult to say that what's been done is a success. 10 years after, more than 10 years after the conflict erupted in Mali in 2012, we are still in a worse situation than it was 10 years ago. In 2023, we are about to, it's about to be the worst year yet in terms of violence in the region. So you can see that, and also this geopolitical issues happening in the region, the deteriorated perception towards the French that are being kicked out of Mali, out of Burkina Faso, and they are struggling to maintain their presence and their relationship in the region. So that's in terms of security, the role of Barkhane, and then if we talk about the role also of the peacekeeping missions, MINUSMA, who's also one of the largest peacekeeping mission in the world, the most expensive in the world. Yet they are struggling to bring the stability to the region, to Mali. Why? Because when I spoke to the head of MINUSMA in the past, when they first initiated in 2013, when they came in, their answer simply was, we had no idea what we walked into. So understanding the local context, understanding the conflict is key to address these issues. And that's why it brings me to your question about the conflict. Is it the same as it was in the past? Conflicts evolved, the threats evolved. They are not the same as they used to be. So we are still looking at the threats and conflicts. We looked at them back in 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. It's not the war in Iraq. It's not the war in Afghanistan. We're talking about civil wars, civil conflicts that includes multiple actors. It's not state against states. It's not a state against non-state actors. We are talking about non-state actors, including, for example, jihadist groups. We're talking about ethnic-based armed groups. We're talking about the criminal networks, drug traffickers, human traffickers, etc. And what's been happening in West Africa, in the Central, in the Sahel, has an impact on what's happening in the waters. So we all remember all the situation that Libya was going through with the boats trying to cross to Europe and the tragedies. So and the same could happen towards as the conflicts continue to expand to West Africa. The conflict has reached parts of northern Burkina, northern Cote d'Ivoire, northern Ghana, northern Benin, northern Togo. The threat is already there. If not by evident by attacks claimed by Al-Qaeda or Islamic State affiliated groups, but also it's an area where they already operate. And when you have criminal networks, terrorist groups operating in there, there is demand for what? There is demand for weapons. Those weapons, where did they come from? Where did they transit? How they arrive to the inland? They go through those ports. That's how they reach the Sahel region. That's how they reach terrorist groups. That's how they reach criminal networks. So what's been done has been really, the results unfortunately been very limited because we didn't understand the issue, including myself, because I've approached the conflict 10 years ago differently the way I approach it today. As I mentioned, because of the complexity of it. We need new concepts, new frameworks to approach this conflict in order to address these issues. And if we get to it later, I'm happy to provide some recommendations on how to tackle those issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, that's a lot of recommendations we can also depict from your speech right now, and the need for the conflict prevention. For instance, I can recall the initial aspects for the operation on anti-piracy, in which we know we are at sea, we have to be present at sea for the first instance, but we know to prevent of the phenomena to grow up, we have to intervene on land thoroughly, we have to understand the societal dimensions, and then really we can prevent piracy. So we fight piracy mostly on land, although we are at sea. Well, now moving to Timothy from ISS. We had a small discussion also about, well, what is the priority areas of intervention of ISS in these topics. And I understand, and this is constructive because this gives us some different dimensions on the same topic. And I kept this for you, the importance of the maritime spatial planning in addressing ports and other critical infrastructures, let's say submarine cables, energy cables. And I agree with you when you said, well, you have to identify and address the security perspective, which in a significant extent represents a gap on this maritime spatial planning process. In US they call it marine spatial process, but we are speaking spatial planning, but we are speaking about the same topic anyway. Can you tell us a little bit on the perspective in terms of interagency planning, because it can start from scratch on the MSP, for instance, and the preparedness and intervention possibilities. And give us also, if possible, some examples in Western African states that you already witnessed. Thank you. Please, Timothy.
Thank you, João, and thank you very much for asking me to address today's panel and the discussion. Thank you very much to the Atlantic Centre. I'm delighted to be joined by my Minister for South Africa today as well. Your Excellencies, it's fantastic to be able to address some of these topics with you in the audience, and to share, I think, as well, some of the reflections we've had on throughout the week of the course, which we've discussed some of these issues. The subject, or the reason why I thought it was a good idea to anchor what I wanted to say, and forgive my love of maritime metaphors and puns, but to anchor the discussion around marine spatial planning was based on ISS research, but the research of peer and partner organizations trying to forecast the way forward, is that we are facing not just limited space around much of the African continent. There are very few, for instance, if you look at the shape of Africa on a map, it is very convex. Very few natural inlets, natural harbors, areas in which maritime activity to the extent you could see in Europe, for instance, with its numerous peninsulas and islands, could organically develop. There's very limited space, and that space is already under strain from competing industries and activities. Now, that's not necessarily going to cause insecurity, but it's always something to manage. The issue then is complicated by the fact that as African countries generally, we are unfortunately very resource poor in terms of the ability to invest in these new infrastructures, in critical infrastructure, in ports, in handling or keeping to pace with the kind of technological requirements which are being put in place around the world. Smart ports, cyber security. These are issues which we are looking to invest in, but as I say, we don't necessarily have that available, either funding or, as Stephanie said as well, with the idea of sea blindness, that is not really a higher priority, and there are many good reasons why. Many countries, for instance, are very land-focused for reasons of conflict or agriculture, and that's to be expected in many places. But the key aspect now is we have limited time, limited space, limited resources, but limited time. Forecasting, which is a key part of what we want to do, is looking ahead and looking at things like sea level rises, coastal erosion, and the complete importance then of having either holistic or comprehensive interagency, as you said, approaches, because there will be so many competing uses in spaces which are shrinking. Sea level rises, as forecasted, are going to remove large parts of not just coastlines, but also render them very difficult or inhospitable in cases of extreme weather. And I'm shifting a little bit to the Indian Ocean here, but you see the effect of the cyclones in Mozambique on a regular basis to see that the inundation which can occur has a tremendous impact too. So investing in critical infrastructure in an area under stress, where there is competing uses, which is suffering extreme weather, and where population forecasts are expected to grow as well. Africa is a very young continent. There is expected to be an increase in population relative to the rest of the world. And as forecasts seem to predict, most of these people will be settling, or be forced sometimes to settle, in the very coastal areas where we're talking about this situation of scarcity and stress. Now, again, it doesn't necessarily automatically mean there will be insecurity and reasons to have either security policies or a development policy which is very security focused, but it creates those conditions. And obviously the time to act is now. The time is not enough time, but having a good idea then of what is at stake and then what we can do about it. And marine spatial planning or maritime spatial planning as a tool is going to be essential in ports. West Africa, for instance, we've Air Vice Marshal from Ghana. We had a fantastic conversation last night talking about the uses of ports in places like Tema, in Accra. Those are places where there is a sort of a set of policies which are being put in place, but they need to also engage with coastal communities. And coastal communities, as I say, are in sometimes a state of flux. And the ability to feel secure in terms of a human security aspect in many parts of coastal Africa is unfortunately worsening in this situation. So I've mentioned human security. I kind of try to weave in the critical infrastructure element. The opportunity, the space available is under stress. I know I'm fixating quite a little bit on space here as well, but as one of the key topics we've been discussing over the last couple of days has been undersea cables. And I believe this event is also being broadcast over the internet as well, so I'm sure many people who are tuning in are actually able to watch because of the subsea cables too. That it created a very strong takeaway from this course, which I thought I'd share with you all here, and I'm very happy to expand on that as we go throughout the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for this first set of questions and answers from your side. And I also trying to explain a little bit of this way of thinking to the audience. Well, this first set of questions somehow, not completely, not broadly, but somehow touches what we in the military used to call the .MLPFI. Doctrine, organization, training, personnel, leadership, funding or finance, And last but not least, interoperability. And this applies for the operation itself, the ways we are operating, and we need to go more integrated, interagency wise, but also we have to prepare the supporting technology for that perspective too. Just imagine, we are speaking about the physical dimension of the security, but also the cyber dimension of the security. And in ports, we are speaking about the single window, port single window. But now we are jumping for the logistics single window, and the number of stakeholders will increase dramatically. And we have to ensure the security perspective over this infrastructure, so to say. And those are challenges for the future, for interoperability, not just on the technology side, but also in the way we cooperate each other. So interagency has a tremendous challenge in face of the future. And I will try to divide now this question, and at the end I will try to have a small period for Q's and A's of the audience. So on that time I just ask you to fasten the seat belts because the questions are coming. And you need to be prepared to answer them properly. But, well, this kind of perspective tends to give to identify two major perspectives. One, why we are doing this? Are we doing this? And mainly because we need to improve the posture to prevent conflict prevention, prevention of all the other operational activities taking place, including on port security, of course, and then having a proper readiness to respond on contingency situations. So prevention and readiness to respond, I think, are the two topics that we have to focus on the next question. We addressed the broad sense of capabilities. Now let's combine them and let's make them happy for a proper end state, okay? So, moving again to Christopher, I know you have a catalog of solutions for this. Maybe not fully, not completed, but on the way to be a supporting tool on training to do so. So tell us a little bit about the catalog, and now you address prevention and readiness to respond, please.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. For us, prevention is much better than curing. We all know this, but we do face in reality that a lot of ports and vessels in coastal areas still, unfortunately, wait till something happens and then react. And I think this is more costly on the long run. We can take Beirut, which was an accident. Could it have been prevented? This is not the forum to discuss this, but in case it would have been able to prevent by taking more preventive actions, then we would have been happy. We see today Beirut is not recovered yet. We're already 2020, 23. How more or many years will it take? We don't know. But these things we should try to minimize. And yes, exactly, prevention. Prevention is therefore our main driver into the program. And we have programs, in fact, actions that we do out of a catalog on strategic level. We want to go to ports and see if the laws are adequate, if they're really in phase. There's different security laws between the police, the ISPS codes that have been translated nationally, and so others. We want to give training as well, to operational training for people on the job, security trainings. We also have trainings, even academic trainings, if we need to have them even to masters and PhD levels. We can give trainings to, let's say, naval people. We can give trainings for boat people on the floor. Let's call it all the operational aspects to give them second ideas or best practices from all over the world and get this also over to them. And the last is definitely the interagency cooperation is extremely vital, as you mentioned. I do agree. And therefore, like we have here now, the center, the Atlantic Center, where we could do networking, where we can share best practices between each other. I had the luck to do the same in Douala last year. in also a security seminar, and you see the benefits that people get from there, next to telephone numbers, but also ideas from other ports, European ports, African ports, South American ports, Asian ports. I think we can all raise the bar because we have a common goal, is prevent terroristic actions, prevent that we have really risks in ports. There are two examples, and I assume everybody has received this paper, so I propose you can read them in detail yourself if you're interested. We have two ongoing actions. One is in fact for establishing for the Coast Guard a drone unit which they want to start, and there we are not going to say, okay, we deliver drones, that's easy, that's like a present. No, we go further. What we will do is we will have from our catalog, we go from the institutional level, the laws on drone use, privacy, military, whatever, how can it be adapted to this? How can they work with it, the Coast Guard? We'll set up the organization of the drone unit together with them. How do they organize it? Procurement, management, getting people trained in adequate levels and continue rehearsal trainings and so on. And then next to that, definitely have an interagency and international cooperation. For example, this Coast Guard could just over the border take care of some incidents who, in the other side, could benefit then countries next door, because we often see that borders don't count for terrorists. So this is what we are working on. The second example, you can read yourself, that's one in ports we're doing in the Gulf of Guinea. And there we're also going to have some actions, a lot of trainings, and specifically for security.
Thank you so much, Christopher. We have to have short answer question, statement. I will move now to Stephanie again. Well, with the same perspective of your areas of study and intervention, having in mind this perspective of posture to prevent, readiness to respond, associate people, organization, technology, and please say what is in your mind about this, please.
Yeah, I think what I want to say draws from everything that we've heard today. We know that dynamics are changing. If we take the Gulf of Guinea region, for instance, that's essentially very true. Maritime traffic is increasing. As Africa's population is increasing, we are experiencing increased demand. So naturally, artificial maritime choke points will begin to emerge. Of course, we have the natural ones that are formed from the narrow corridors, right? But I believe Tim mentioned the issue of climate change and how it impacts certain things out at sea. So for instance, the ability of vessels to navigate certain waters because of extreme weather conditions. So yes, we might begin to see maritime traffic moving to certain points across Africa, for instance. And then we have to begin to consider the security implications that may emerge from that. So I like the idea of marine spatial planning as a tool that needs to be employed in addressing these things. And of course, I mean, strategically, we need to think about the fact that, new dynamics require new approaches, right? I think at the end of the day, as he mentioned, one of the things that is really important, especially in the African context, is the issue of interagency collaboration. If you take West African countries in particular, you notice that every single state has a whole gamut of maritime institutions and agencies. They may not directly be referred to as maritime agencies, but these are, government agencies that have one role or the other to play when it comes to safeguarding our waters. So it's important that these agencies begin to speak to each other. The strategy documents already exist, so there's no need to come up with new strategies linked to new strategies regarding how states need to collaborate or pathways to collaborating. I think we need to stand on our existing strategy documents and legal frameworks and see how best we can foster a sense of collaboration among agencies.
Interagency. Okay. Well, for the Policy Center, the same scope of thinking, and from your perspective, what is in your mind now? And please, if we can be short in the next statements, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely rethink what we are already doing in the region. What's happening in the region right now, I will call it, there is a traffic jam of efforts. You have multiple actors. So as I mentioned, you have UN agencies, UN peacekeeping mission, you have the French operations, you have Chinese, now you have Russia as well. You have the US that recently declared West Africa as a priority for the Global Fragility Act. So there is an interest from different actors, but unfortunately, sometimes the agenda of Washington, D.C., or the agenda of Brussels, or Paris, or Moscow, or Beijing, it does not really meet the agenda of the capitals in West Africa. So there is need to be some sort of consultations that it's timely, not consultations that take years before it's actually happening, because things are evolving quickly and rapidly, and by the time we react, it's too late. Things have changed, and what you have designed is already outdated. So I think that having a timely, aligned strategy. Second, continue such events in terms of like advocacy of what's been done, what we need to do. Think of ideas, new actors, collaboration, and communicate of what everyone else is doing. Governments, development agencies, private sector, NGOs, etc. All they need to communicate, practitioners, academia, they all need to have some sort of dialogue so we can learn from each other, because we all have different perspectives and everyone is brilliant. The third is it's the prevention. If we talk about the prevention, I think the prevention of misuse of the tools, the respect of the population. Sometimes we have advanced technologies and they are not used for what needs to be used necessarily. And I have experienced this in firsthand. So what does that do when you do that is you damage the reputation of the state. And who's going to benefit when you have this damaged relationship and perception towards the states? It's what's happening in parts of the Sahel, parts of northern parts of the coastal states, is this relationship that is really complex between the state, whatever the form of the state is in that area, and local communities. So that's just one example of like avoiding creating these tensions between the states and the communities, and so we can reinforce this social cohesion in those areas of conflicts and prevention of further conflicts.
Thank you so much. Well, coherence, I think it's the next word that we can depict from here. Interagency, yes. Coherence, we have to understand and properly tailor the tools to adapt to the circumstances and the geographical condition or situation. Please, Timothy, the same aspects of preparedness and prevention and readiness to respond.
Thank you. Yeah, the challenges are vast. We can understand that, and the solutions aren't going to be there either apparent or easy for a while. And what's going to be, I think, key throughout any process of either creation of prevention or risk strategies which are preventative in their sense, is through greater public interest and getting the public interested in what is going on. And by what I mean by that is, many of the initiatives we're talking about when we talk about coherence and interagency collaboration are at a sort of a top-down or top-across and then down level. When it gets to the coastline, when it gets to the communities, especially I would say from the research that we've done in the Indian Ocean as well as the Atlantic Ocean, is that the customs, the values attached to what it means to be a seafarer or what it means to be living along the coast, there's been a breakage, or there hasn't been that linkage up yet still. The kind of the bottom-down approach, bottom-up approach, which is required is what is key there. And the inclusivity then, the reaching out and having a very broad, not just interagency, but community-wide engagement with what is considered, or what is going to be the next policy. Stephanie mentioned the importance, or say the lack of the inclusivity for centuries of women, or in terms of thinking around gender inclusivity. And also, I'd say a very important thing for Africa, which I've highlighted, was the importance of youth inclusivity. The way we're going, you know, we almost have a clear idea of what we want to achieve, and it could be in terms of we all work together to have a sustainable blue economy, or we work together to have an extra 100 billion of our whatever currency added to our GDP per year. But we're still not very clear about the ways and the means of getting there. When we're talking about interagency, collaboration, or bottom-up perspectives, it's about those ways and means. And what we can see so far is we haven't necessarily gotten the correct ways. We're very siloed in our approaches. I think if it's within governments, ministries, departments are not always able to collaborate or coordinate coherently, what you were saying. But also I'd say the inclusivity, the need for innovation now is coming increasingly from sources or people who have been long neglected. And I would say almost a call to man the oars, as it were. Man's not a very good term for this, but the inclusivity in particular of new voices, new entrepreneurs who are thinking about what kind of skills they would like in the future. If it's about, you know, training and research, education opportunities, what will the coastlines look in 50 years' time? I've kind of sketched they might be very, very, very different places, but if there are people there, the people who will be old by then need to be engaged with now for their inputs and contributions. So that's what I would like to add to this part.
So
Thank
I
you.
will resume on awareness, on the way you anticipate the needs. Demand is increasing exponentially, we also can say, and we have to be aware of the need for cohesion and inclusion across all the society. So the problems are not anymore just property of defense or property of development. They are married for a long, and this marriage lasts for long, and we hope we will continue in the future. So I had the opportunity in my life to be on the defense side, and I had the chance to think about, never forget that development is the most relevant piece of your purpose. So you have to ensure development conditions. But then when you are on the development side, you cannot forget that you need security to make sure that you benefit of the development vibrance, that you can benefit in a peaceful world. So this is a challenge for all of us. Integration also takes us to another level of power. We used to say the need to know. The need to know is information, of course, is based on the division of power. But when we go for the need to share, we have also to embrace the sharing of power. And this is culturally a huge challenge for all of us. We are not used to that. But really, we need to make this way forward. And otherwise, integration will be at the cost of mitigating a lot of difficulties. Then we learn that went wrong, and we try to improve next step. But it's always a question of the major change on the mindset of the society. Well, without further ado, can we have a short period of answers and questions, or questions and answers? Sorry, or I can use the micro for someone. So, is there any question for the speakers? Okay, thank you. Just present yourself, if possible, for all of us to know.
Thank you very much. My name is Sascha W. I'm from Germany, from the Federal Foreign Office. Thank you very much for the presentations, and give us your thoughts on how to work together on a comprehensive or an integrated approach. And I think we heard a lot of good things how it could work, because we have a lot of challenges in West Africa. We heard yesterday the spillover, the threat in the border area, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Togo, Benin, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire. There's a linkage definitely to the coastal area because we have a climate change, what we heard. We had huge population in the coastal area and a lot of threats in the water. Piracy, armed robbery, pollution, oil bunkering, oil spill, and so on. I think what we heard, the interagency cooperation is really good. It's essential because the Navy, the Army can't do everything, and therefore it needs a sustainable approach. What Stephanie said, it needs an integrated approach. The nexus between security development is essential, and also the focus on women in maritime. And my address is also hopefully that we see next course more female staff here as well, because Germany, for example, is really living the feminine foreign policy, and happy to have the minister
Point
here.
taken.
and a lot of ambassadors here, and what the approach in the Atlantic and the Gulf of Guinea, I think from our G7 FOC, Germany as a co-chair with Cote d'Ivoire, the Atlantic Center can play also a crucial role, because you have the linkage to South America, you have the linkage to Africa, you have the linkage to European Union and so on. And I see here really a great value, and it could be play a crucial role, focus in the future. It's not a question, it's only a statement, sorry. That we can do more in the future and use the Atlantic Center and bring the development and safety and security together in the future. And I think I cannot speak, of course, of my government, I'm not, but I can speak on the behalf of the G7 FOC, and we will support this also in the future, and therefore happy to have the minister here, and thank you for the Atlantic Center for this great platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think it's a very important contribution and recommendation for the future courses. And of course, the development is a part that plays a major role also in this vision of the wider Atlantic as a safe and prosper wide Atlantic. Well, is there any other question? Please.
Dear panelists, thank you very much. You've brought up...
Can you just present yourself for the audience?
Jan Hans, I am representing the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. Thank you very much, panelists. You brought up a number of really important and valuable questions. Can I please also ask that we consider the youth in when we talk about so many of the communities, and because the future leadership and management, as we've heard, are very complex structures. And I think if we can already start working in parallel by including the youth and consulting with the youth, it would be important. And then just, I would like to throw another spanner in the wheels and ask you, what are your views about the impact of climate change on climate security issues? Thank you.
Well, we try to be expedite. Maybe this idea of the youth should be addressed to Stephanie and Christopher. Maybe I just had one point to your question, because the youth dimension is very relevant, but technically wise, we also can say access to first employment. Because in our economy system, we miss the first employment access to the seafarer's career, for instance, and we are not addressing properly the dimension of the ocean dimension and all that embraces on science, technology, careers at sea, or defense, the Navy, whatever. Please, Stephanie, you first.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the issue of youth involvement, because that's something that we are very passionate about at the Gulf of Guinea Maritime Institute. So a lot of our programs have been centered on just that, actively involving the youth in addressing blue economy and maritime security concerns. I think when it comes to the issue of youth, there are a whole lot of prospects there, especially if we remember that the focus of this entire course has been on technology in the maritime industry. We have unique qualities as youth, when it comes to innovation and fast, being quick to adapt to some of these technological trends. So I think who better to involve than the youth, right? Because if there's anything we've understood throughout this course, it's the fact that technology is important if we are to achieve the positive ends that we hope to achieve when it comes to maritime security, not just across Africa. So certainly, it's about recognizing first and foremost the fact that we have something unique to bring to the table. And this is, I think I've said this several times, this is not to discredit the experience that older generations bring to bear. But just like I said, we need both men and women at the table because of different perspectives. We also need youth because we bring some unique insights to the table as well. So I'm glad you raised that issue.
And youth means the Ministry of Education as well, somehow. Well, please, Christopher.
Maybe I could take the climate change. Climate change, we have not seen any real effects in ports, direct effects. Lucky the ports are connected to the water, so we assume that all the rainwater goes into the sea, call it like this. We do see operational issues that could raise from really high or a lot of rain coming on, but this has happened in the past. We see power cuts, but that has happened in the past. What we do not yet see is, for example, electronics, because we have a lot of equipment, a lot of machinery, this operational technology, we call this in cyber technology, call it like this, being connected in the future with IT, electronics, and maybe this could affect it. I would say I cannot really give an answer that the climate change has a direct effect on it, but maybe in the future we should take this anyhow into account that this could be another problem. Now, maybe on the gender side, we do see that training and we do see in ports that in the past, commercial ports were really heavy physical work. Dock workers had to get bags of 50 kilos on their back. Today that's all finished. So in fact, machinery handling can be done by whatever gender, call it neutral, whatever gender you are. And in this case, we see definitely that slowly on in the maritime sector in ports, we get more and more ladies also that take the job. It was a man's world. It is historically like this, and I do already see it changing. And I do know that there is a lot of pressure from also, let's say, West Africa. A lot of participants are from that region, and a lot of European Commission funds are going that direction, and they're pushing for 50% gender equality. This is a hard push. That's a real big focus. And this maybe helps that already we see there is a change in a positive way. That's our opinion for the moment we see in this sport.
Yeah, that's the challenge of attractiveness of the careers as well, and that is a huge challenge to all of us. Please.
If I may, very quick, the question about climate change and the impact on maritime security. I think if we talk about West Africa, it's the most growing population in the world, if I'm not mistaken. And if we look at the next 10, 20 years, on top of conflicts, climate shocks, we are probably going to see more migration towards port cities, urbanization. And we know also in port cities there is important number of criminality. So that could have an impact on ports, port cities in the future. That's just one comment I would like to on climate change.
Well, maybe on the same question, do you want to say something? Timothy, perhaps this is the last question because we are already closing, but
Well,
please, Timothy, go
Very,
ahead.
very briefly, and it's a phrase you use about access to first employment, which I think is crucial. A takeaway here is that we're looking now at the future of maritime industries, indeed a lot of industries, as uncrewed, autonomous, unmanned, however you describe it, part of the fourth industrial revolution. And that is going to result perhaps in efficiency, ports which can process quicker, which are able to facilitate trade more. But as a career, as you say, as a career for people who are looking or are being told in the future is oceans. We need to think blue. There are, especially in many African countries, an increasing awareness that the oceans are potentially a source of untapped potential. And yet the ability to keep up with training or skills is perhaps going to create another gap in the future. You'll have a large number of people who want to be involved, who want to be part of that innovation, but perhaps because of, like say, the importance stressed on new types of technology being implemented without necessarily maybe factoring in the importance of the human element to it in terms of employment or part of a career which suits your population, is a potential thing I would just highlight there as well, because there wouldn't be a lot of access to first employment in a situation where we are incredibly technological in that regard. Thank you.
Yeah, well, just to conclude, that gives me again the opportunity to try to find affordable solutions to solve 75% of the problems that we have to address. They don't need exactly to go for the top edge of the costs of the solution. We can do a lot with affordable, low-cost solutions and globally, so to say. And well, development also needs for us to look to the future. We address this topic of the youth, and thank you very much for raising the topic from the audience. I recall studies that I've been involved in the past about the wide Atlantic, and when we speak about youth, we are speaking for the wide Atlantic of about 400 million youngsters in the coastal zones of the 4 continents. And they are all looking for opportunities. And it's our obligation, so to say, to provide a vibrant blue economy in the Atlantic, safe, secure, and vibrant blue economy for the wide Atlantic, for the benefit of those youngsters that are at the moment waiting for that. It's our obligation. Well, I think we close this round table.
No, please.
Oh, please. Can we have one more?
Okay, so
Okay. Okay. Erase. Please continue.
Thank you. I am attaché of Angola in Portugal. I want to know something about your experience in Angola about Bahia Farta. Okay. Yes.
It's for Christopher?
No.
For me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, but you have to make the question again, because I was lost a bit in the organization to whom to address.
Okay, my question...
Can you make the question again?
Yes, my question is, and your experience, you was working in Angola a long time ago. What is your experience about Bahia Farta in Angola in this case?
Oh, well, a huge challenge for a country to acquire a high-value asset. A huge challenge that today we have to look together in cooperation to create the proper capacity. And I'm sure that if that capacity will be developed and based in Angola, you can have a real asset for the Atlantic to provide services not just for the benefit of Angola as a sovereign state, but also for the benefit of the coastal countries that may benefit for the quality of such an asset. And this is the importance of sharing those tools, but also we have to share our experience, our technical capabilities that can be combined, and maybe private-public opportunities should also be considered in these circumstances, because state-owned assets cannot sometimes be sustained to the point that we are creating the demand. And we have to find business models to operate those types of capabilities. But again, Bahia Farta is a good example of a high standard quality vessel for oceanography and fishing research, for instance. But there are a lot of more affordable assets that can cost less than 1 million euros for the monitoring of the coastal zones. And we need a lot of information from the coastal zones in the Atlantic. And they can provide valuable information for the world and ownership of data to every coastal state, irrespective of their economical standard or performance. And this is what we have to reach through cooperation like the Atlantic Centre, like proper solutions that we can massify. Otherwise, we fall on the hands of high standard solutions that lays on the hands of very few. So if we want to go for this idea of interagency information sharing, well, information is just means for an end state, but you need the other tools to reach that end state. So we need to create affordable solutions to massify. And the wide Atlantic is huge, as you know. So we have to combine the costly assets that can go to the deep sea, they reach the deep sea, and we have to combine with very small solutions. And locally, those communities, if they are interoperable in terms of sharing of information, sharing of knowledge, well, they can contribute to a higher national and international data housing, or wherever will be the solution to get access to that information as well. So it's for the benefit of a wider societal dimension. Okay. Well, again, we are now closing the round table. I would like to thank the experts that have been here with me this afternoon. It was a pleasure and an honor to have been participating and challenging you with some of my questions and perspectives. I hope you also have considered valuable, at least was my intention, but also to thank to the audience. And I hope you have enjoyed so much as I did to be here speaking with them. And thank you for your presence. Thank you, Minister of Defense, regional authorities present, military authorities, guests, and have a good afternoon.
We invite the coordinator of Atlantic Centre, Rear Admiral Nuno de Noronha Bragança, to address the audience for its final remarks, please.
Madam Minister of National Defense, Excellency, if you allow me, before I start my intervention, to invite you all to look to this panel, and we see all the multi-dimension that the Atlantic Centre is involved. Sea, land, human security, and so this is really a good image what we are doing in the Atlantic Centre. Madam Minister of National Defense, Excellency, I would like to begin by thanking you for your participation on the closing event of the third Maritime Security course, which attests that the Atlantic Centre is a priority of Portuguese foreign and defense policy, which has always been emphasized. Mr. Undersecretary of the Presidency of the Regional Government of Açores, on your behalf, I thank the regional government for the repeated support that it has given to the initiative of the Atlantic Centre held in the Terceira, and I'm sure that it will continue to be a close and participative partner in the development that we intend to achieve in the near future. Honorable ambassadors of the partner countries and others here present, civilian and military entities, guest speakers, and auditors of the course, I'm very pleased to address you in this closing ceremony of the third course of Maritime Security under the theme Technological and Digital Challenges in the Maritime Sector, organized by the Atlantic Centre and National Defence Institute of Portugal in partnership with the Gulf of Guinea Maritime Institute, the Institute for Security Studies, the Policy Centre for the New South, the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, and the EU External Service, and to all of whom I express my grateful thanks. I would also like to highlight, Minister, if you allowed me, the support of the Portuguese Armed Forces, emphasizing the welcome at the Portuguese Air Force Base, thank you, Colonel Paulino, and the National Maritime Authority, the security forces and service, and the various agencies involved during the different stage of the course. And last but not the least, all the staff members that in all these days allowed us to achieve to this moment and to the results that we'll share in the near future. Madam Minister, ladies and gentlemen, the mission of the Atlantic Centre is to contribute towards the development of an Atlantic community of interests, focus on the security of the region in a broad sense, and committed to developing cooperative initiatives and actions to address jointly established priorities according to the principle of complementarity. Today, if I can say 5 years after its foundation, we can congratulate ourselves on the participative, plural, and systematic way in which the Atlantic Centre has played its role in promoting political dialogue on Atlantic maritime security in its broad sense, prompting reflection and debate on the cross-cutting challenge facing this region. Moreover, it is precisely in time of greater uncertainty, doubt, and major difficulties, such as those that the international community is undergoing, that the work of clarification and discussion becomes truly crucial, playing a fundamental role in facilitating the understanding of the contemporary world. We sometimes tend to underestimate the strategic decision which is practiced as a result in the creation of a new space of political dialogue, research, and acknowledged development, as well as support for capacity buildings. A space that, however, does not in any way condition the partners' participation in other organizations. On the contrary, in my opinion, the participation is in different organizations, besides having obvious advantage for each of our partners, reinforce and strengthen the Atlantic Centre by allowing different insights and contributions to be brought to this space of dialogue and diversity. I would like to refer, in this regard, to its particular significance that this edition of the course coincides with the year in which the 10th anniversary of the architecture of Yaoundé is celebrated, which I am pleased to highlight. I am convinced that in this beginning of the activity, Atlantic Centre has been making its way, which allows for a note of optimism regarding the future. First, because I believe that relations between all partners, countries and organizations are going through a good phase, which is not negligible, accumulate capital. Second, because there is already a significant and diversified heritage of agreements shared by 21 countries out of 65 located in the Atlantic Basin, which we aim to continue to increase. Third, the Atlantic Centre has been developing a practice of political and diplomatic dialogue, nowadays consolidated through meetings between the points of contact of the countries, creating through this dialogue a growing sense of ownership, ensuring the necessary political impulse and coordination. Fourth, on a symbolic level, the Atlantic Centre has promoted to be a title with enough catalyzing force, generating a remarkable response shown in the annual organization under the initiative with the partnership of the Atlantic Centre on several events on which this course and this fantastic round table that we finish our course in a very good example. In conclusion, I would say that the Atlantic Centre has succeeded in broadening its external projection, having also shown a remarkable capacity of attraction and attests by interests on third countries and organizations that have requested membership or observer status. Also, not being in exhaustive list, I believe this overview allows us to face the future of the Atlantic Centre with reasonable optimism, not as an exercise of futurology, but rather with our eyes fixed on the horizon as a way of understanding the present, confident that the choice we make amongst the options currently available us behind the constraints we do not control will result in a future that to a large extent in the hands of all of us to continue to build. So, Madam Minister, thank you very much to be present here again, and thank you all to be present in this initiative of the Atlantic Centre. Thank you.
We now invite the Regional Undersecretary of the Presidency of the Regional Government of the Açores, Pedro Faria de Castro, to deliver his closing remarks.
Your Excellency, the Minister of National Defense, Your Excellency, the coordinator of the Atlantic Centre, and all the representatives of the states signatories of the Memorandum of Understanding. And I want to make here a special compliment to the military authorities in the Açores who work every day for a region, a safer region in the Açores. Allow me to welcome the presence of the Minister of National Defense of the Government of Portugal, who is here with us today at the closing of the working week of the Atlantic Centre. Madam Minister, your presence in the Açores today has a very special meaning, as it highlights Portugal's commitment to the Atlantic Centre project. The government of the Azores, in the exercise of its constitutional and statutory powers, values the action of the Portuguese state in the search for solutions that serve the national interests within the international system. Because it is also our understanding that the economic, social, and cultural development of the autonomous region of the Azores is exceptionally enhanced by our geographical circumstances. 9 islands in the center of the North Atlantic, with a spread of 600 kilometers between the easternmost and westernmost islands. For the European Union, we are anothermost region. This means that we are recognized as having various constraints arising from our island's statute and complemented by other geographical particularities, obliging the European Union, under the terms of the treaties, to adopt specific measures to enable us to accompany the other European regions in adopting common policies. But also for the European Union, we are much more than that. We are a reference of Europe's responsibility in the Atlantic Ocean, a responsibility that also derives from the European treaties. And I'm talking about values: democracy, the rule of law, respect for fundamental rights, founded on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and an acquis we are proud to uphold. I would add here the value of protecting the environment of the planet. The Atlantic Centre can and must be an institution that represents even more than this. At least, this is what we infer from the joint statement on the Atlantic Centre signed less than a year ago. Focusing on pan-Atlantic relations, with a strong reference to the Atlantic community, the signatory states represented here today are looking at the opportunity that the Atlantic brings them to contribute to the effective reinforcement of security in this part of the planet. As I had the occasion to say in the opening session of the 3rd Maritime Safety Course, the Azores government takes the security of the area that defines our territory very seriously, because we know how important the stability of the Atlantic region is to our development, to our progress, also for peace, an inestimable value for any human community. In close collaboration with the government of the Republic, which has the competences for territorial protection, we manage our region with the clear objective of leveraging interaction with our neighbors, the countries, the regions closest to us, whether in geographical terms or in economic and cultural terms. And our neighbors are the countries on the Atlantic coast. Our security is your security. You have here in the Azores a strategic reference that may contribute to the stabilization of the Atlantic, not only by the symbolic nature of its location, but mainly by the effective capacity to act for the security of this area. allow me, Madam Minister, to leave a challenge to the Atlantic Centre. The Azores have a huge sea. Our EEZ is the largest in the European Union, almost 1 million square kilometers. But we also have an immense sky. The space sector is now a reality in international relations, both in its economic exploitation and in its use for security and defense purposes. We already have facilities in Terceira Islands, the Air Centre, and particularly in Santa Maria Islands, where the Azores government is promoting, in close partnership with the government of Portugal and the growing interest of the European Commission, the development of a space ecosystem. From the Azores, we look at space without the constraints of most continental regions. Therefore, this is a matter that we believe fits in the objectives of the Atlantic Centre as a sector to be valued in the register of the joint statement. And we are, Madam Minister, totally available and committed to assume our role in your sites within the constitutional framework that regulates the institutional relationship between the autonomous region and the state. Our interest is the interest of the Azores. Our interest is the interest of Portugal. Our interest is the common interest that unites all states that seek peace, the prosperity of their peoples, and the guarantee that the present generation ensures the protection of our planet as the common home of humanity. Thank you very much for your presence in the Azores, and thank you all to come to the Azores. Thank you very much.
Her Excellency, the Portuguese Minister of National Defense, Helena Carreiras, will now address the audience, please.
Regional and the Secretary of the Presidency of the Açores Government, Mayor of Praia da Vitória, Rear Admiral Coordinator of the Atlantic Centre, Colonel Commander of the Air Base No. 4, Ambassadors, Lieutenant General Operational Commander of the Açores, Generals, Speakers, Moderators, and participants of the third course on maritime security, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great joy that I am back in Terceira to take part in this closing ceremony of the third course on maritime security of the Atlantic Centre, following 4 days of intense lectures and activities, including practical exercises and demonstrations, which this year I did not make to attend, but next year I promise I will be here. I would like to begin by thanking everyone for their presence here today and to salute the regional government of Açores, as well as all the institutional partners that took part in this initiative. That includes, of course, the Air Force for hosting us once more at Lajes Air Base, but also those that collaborated in making this a truly collaborative Atlantic partnership. The National Defense Institute, the Gulf of Guinea Maritime Institute, the Institute for Security Studies, the Policy Center for the New South, and the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. I would also like to offer a special word of appreciation to the recently appointed coordinator of the Atlantic Centre, Rear Admiral Noronha de Bragança, who has led the organization of this course and who, I am certain, will achieve the important mission of consolidating the Atlantic Centre as a relevant actor in the broader framework of this common ocean space. Allow me to express another word of gratitude to all the partner countries and institutions involved and committed to this project. The pace of activities of the Atlantic Centre has significantly increased over the last 2 years. And this event is further proof of how far we have come. But we also know there would be no Atlantic Centre without your participation and active engagement. Thank you for your continuing support. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in uncertain and unpredictable times marked by significant transformations at a global scale. One such transformation has been the subject of considerable focus during the course that took place throughout this week, namely the growth of digital and technological challenges in the maritime sector. Indeed, new technologies such as artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, big data, robotics, digital security, 3D printing, among others, have been emerging at an alarming pace, often carrying significant disruptive potential and with profound consequences for all areas of human activity. This is particularly evident in maritime contexts, with the fast expanding digitization of services and other activities in this sector. We need only to remember that nearly 90% of global trade is carried out by sea, or that most global data flows currently go through undersea cables. But important opportunities can also emerge in this context, such as the use of space-based capabilities for maritime surveillance and information exchange. In other words, we need to be ready to account for both the risks and the possibilities that this new era might entail. Several international organizations have already adjusted their course of action to these changes. The European Union has just reviewed its maritime security strategy and action plan, attributing considerable priority to how new technological advancements might affect its influence at sea. NATO has also continued to implement its long-standing maritime strategy through the reinforcement of the alliance's maritime posture. For its part, Portugal has not been idle. Our defense sector in particular stands at the forefront of important developments in this domain. In Troia, for instance, the Free Technological Zone provides a unique interface between the armed forces, industry and academia, while offering the necessary conditions for the testing and experimentation of innovative technologies, products, services and processes. Even here in the Açores, the continuing development of the space surveillance and tracking project harbors considerable potential for expanded surveillance and security of our national waters. And I do take a very good note of the challenge that has been directed to the Atlantic Centre in terms of space activities. These different efforts now need to be properly incorporated in our own strategic thinking. That includes guaranteeing emerging and disruptive technologies figure high in the ongoing revision of the national defense strategic concept. It also means considering a more sectorial view when deemed more appropriate or necessary. The underlying goal is clear. We must work towards ensuring that the connective maritime domain is properly secured, while at the same time making the most of the fast-changing technologies at our disposal. In this context, the Atlantic Ocean stands out as a unique ecosystem. Indeed, digital and technological developments in the maritime domain are a key area to cooperate with partners from all over the Atlantic, as these developments are fundamental for trade, information, energy flows, for maritime situational awareness, and for identifying growing challenges that we must deal with. As the primary linking hub for North and South America, Europe and Africa, this space, as often called in the past for alternative venues of cooperation, which could overcome previous lines of division. That is precisely where the Atlantic Centre comes in. Based on a holistic and integrated vision of the common security challenges of the Atlantic Ocean as a whole, Portugal has led this initiative for the past few years, steadily building support from the ground up and presenting a variety range of activities. At its core, the Atlantic Centre is a dynamic and flexible project that has regularly adapted itself to the different needs and specificities of the Atlantic Ocean, while building connections between different stakeholders. One of the most obvious advantages of this initiative is that it brings to the same table countries and organizations from the North and the South Atlantic. This is a feature that was lacking and that can greatly contribute to boost relations between every invested part in the security and stability of this shared ocean. The relevance of the efforts behind this project is also particularly evident when considering the ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe, which has generated profound consequences at different levels, namely human security, food security, energy security, or in the questioning of the rules-based international order. All these consequences have begun to reach the shores of the Atlantic Ocean. We are also currently dealing with new and old threats in the Atlantic Ocean. This consists primarily of piracy, armed robbery, transnational terrorism, smuggling and human trafficking, illegal fishing, and climate change. We need to be able to tackle all these challenges decisively. That is why the exercise that took place this morning is especially relevant. And that is why initiatives like the Atlantic Centre constitute privileged forums to propose sustainable solutions to these many issues. We are facing a more volatile international system and increasingly complex theaters of operations and cross-cutting risks. We cannot fail to be ambitious in our efforts to invest in projects such as the Atlantic Centre and in synergies with other complementary initiatives. Investing in the Atlantic Centre is investing in solutions that serve us all. Together we can go further, do more, and ensure an effective participation from across the Atlantic. Thank you.
We declare the ceremony closed. We now invite you to an Azorian biscoitos and a wine tasting. We thank you all for your presence and we wish you a very nice day. Okay. Thank you very much.